You are listening to How to Get Over Your Ex, episode number 168, How to Co-Parent with an Ex. Welcome to How to Get Over Your Ex, a podcast on getting over your ex without it just taking time. I'm your host, breakup coach Dorothy. Let's turn your pain into power and your heartbreak into happy. Hello, my beautiful Bravehearts. How is everyone doing? I have an amazing guest here today, Crystal. She is going to talk to us all about parenting while you're going through a divorce or a breakup. I know many of you have brought this up. We did an entire week-long kind of event where we talked about your kids and like how to help your kids or your teenagers through the divorce/breakup. But what I thought would be really useful is to look at the parenting component and how do you interact? How can you best co-parent even when your ex might not be as involved or your ex might not be, following your instructions, things like that. So Crystal is an expert in this area. She will be helping us walk through all of this. And I have some really good questions from some of my Bravehearts specifically that they wanted to get answered here. So Crystal, thank you so much for coming. Please talk to us. Tell us who you are, what you do, all of the things.
Hey, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So first of all, I have to say, even if you're not a parent, I guarantee you will get something from this episode because I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, but I teach a lot about parenting in a different way than what we were parented. And in order to do that, we have to reparent or self-mother ourselves. And so that process can start at any point in time. In fact, I think it's a lot better to do it even before you have kids so that you don't have these kids that are then like triggering you and bringing up all of this wounding and everything. So we'll talk about that later, but it will be, you'll definitely get something out of it. So I'm a parenting coach. I'm a certified life coach through the life coach school, just like Dorothy. And my background was in psychology. Had a degree in psychology, and then I had a bunch of kids. I had 4 of them. I homeschooled them all, and it's awesome, but it wasn't awesome, which is why I'm here now. But I struggled to parent them in the way that I wanted to. They were only a few years old, like maybe 2 and 4, when I started to first hear about this kind of new parenting approach. Some people call it conscious parenting or gentle parenting, but it's really like parenting in a different way than our parents parented, breaking those generational patterns. I call it connection-based parenting. The focus on connection and focus on relationships. So I think a lot of people that are in this sphere of like healing and doing our own inner work, like we want to parent that way. So I read a bunch of books. My parents actually were the ones who first gave me the books and were like, hey, you should read these. Like this is a way better way. So I read them. I was totally converted. And then I just spent the next decade entirely failing at it. Like I think I was actually worse than before I knew about this parenting approach. Maybe that wasn't true. Maybe it was just that I had this higher elevated idea of what I should be, but I have some neurodiverse kids, and parenting kids that are neurodiverse or highly sensitive is really hard, like on anybody, but it's especially really triggering if you are also highly sensitive, or if you're an empath, or if you have not done any of your own inner work or healing. And so I just had these kids that I felt continuously triggered by, or at least that was my thought, was that they were constantly triggering me and I didn't know how to handle it. And I just felt terrible. And my one kiddo has high functioning autism, and it got to like kind of a headway where it was just terrible. And I was like, we have to do something. And so that's when I first started out getting some support. And like over the course of a very long time, like a year or 2, was able to really turn things around when I started to look inwards at what was going on for me and kind of start that, what I call now healing. I didn't know what was happening at that time. So fast forward now, things were going pretty good. Found the life coach school, decided to become a life coach myself instead of becoming a therapist, which is what I was initially going to do. And in changing myself and how I showed up in the world, I noticed astronomical changes in my kids. Like the intensity and the frequency of what I call meltdowns was like just crazy, like down from like 100 on like a scale down to like 5 to 10%. And also how frequent they happened, also so much less frequent. And now I have these kiddos that are able to regulate themselves emotionally and are so much more confident and so much more compassionate and all the things that we all want. But it started with me. It didn't start with trying to change them, which I mean, is just like a rule in life, right? We try to change other people. It doesn't happen. So, that's my story in a nutshell. And that's what I help parents with now.
I am so excited. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for calling out that even if you aren't a parent, you'll get so much from this episode. So definitely don't dip out too early. Okay. Obsessed with your journey. So excited to hear about all of the meltdowns and how you showed up differently to create different results. This is
Yep.
exciting. Okay. So let's start just with a blanket statement question of just how do we parent peacefully, even when your ex isn't on board? So ex isn't on board, isn't down to like change the way they are parenting or even parent at all. What do you
Mhm.
do?
Okay, this is a great question because I want to let you in on a little secret with people that do have partners currently. Um, they're usually not on board. Almost
So
always.
good.
I have met, I don't even know if I could count on my hands the amount of partners that I've met that were on the same page when it came to parenting. So I would just expect that likely if you have a partner right now, or if you're co-parenting with someone from before, or whatever the case is, that they're not going to be on board. Like that's almost like just what to expect. So, first of all, it's just like, there's no boat that we both need to be on in order to like float in the same direction. Like it's totally fine. But I think the most reassuring thing that I heard years ago, and this was before my husband and I were more on the same page than we are now, at that time we weren't. And I was reading, I think I was listening to a conference, and this lady with a PhD talked a lot about a research. I can't actually tell you what the research was, but she said that you only need one strong and secure attachment in order to give your children that, like that having just one person in their life like that will make them more emotionally resilient and emotionally intelligent as adults. Just one. And I remember feeling so empowered. I remember like tearing up at that because I'm like, oh, I can do it. Like, I don't need everyone in their school. I don't need all of their friends. I don't need my entire family to parent in the way that I'm parenting, including my ex. I can show up in the way I want to. And I have so much power. I have so much influence when I feel that way. Like, how much more empowering is that versus like, I don't know what to do about this, or he doesn't do this, or she doesn't do that. Like, it just steps you into your power instead of out of your power. And so, another little tip that I give people is that there's actually more that unifies you than you think there is. And when you focus on that unifying stuff, it amplifies the unity. So, for instance, if you have a partner or if you have an ex partner and you're, you know, arguing about how to parent or whatever, likely they care about your kids, probably. They probably love them. And they also probably want what's best for them. That's not going to be the case in every case, but for the most part, there's going to be some of those base principles. So even though they might show up in a more, what I call authoritarian way, where they're a lot more strict, a lot more punishment based, or maybe even a more permissive way where there's not a lot of showing up, it still actually might be coming from the space of like, they think or they love that child and they're trying to do their best. So when I believe that about people in my sphere, I always just show up better and I always show up more unified. So even if you feel like you have a really volatile situation there, I would just be like, is there anything here that unifies us? And if not, just go back to like me. Okay, how do I want to show up anyways?
Yeah, I have so many questions off of that one response. So thank you ahead of time. So I feel like I have so many clients and I'm like, I shouldn't say so many clients because I also have a lot of clients who just don't have kids as well. However, a lot of times I'm like thinking of one specific person where her ex-husband started dating someone new, a lot younger, like a lot younger, and then moved that person into their home. And then she had children and then kicked out her children of that house or like used their
Mm.
rooms for like the new step kids is maybe what you would call them. And so like think I just see like a lot of situations like that or situations where the parents like, yeah, I just don't want to be involved with the kids anymore at all.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so what about situations like that? Because I love how you said like most oftentimes they love your child, they love the child, they want what's best for the child, and there are ways to like see how you guys are in agreement. But I also see a lot of instances where I don't think that's necessarily quote unquote true. Like we could do thought work on it, but like what about when we don't want to do thought work on about that? Does that make sense?
Totally, because I do know people like this. Total. I think we all do, right? Where the partner decides they don't actually want to be involved at all. Or maybe the partner is more abusive and we're like, we don't want that involvement because we don't feel like it's physically or emotionally safe for our kids. And I'm just going to go back to that same answer that I gave in that you do really only need one. It's beautiful to have more than one. It's beautiful to share this way of parenting and being with the rest of your family, right? Like siblings and grandparents and all of those people can be a part of that, what I call an attachment village, but be that secure attachment for them also. So you can build that village wherever you are with whoever you're around. And feel that support, which is so needed and so necessary. But also, if you are listening to this and you're like, I have no support, I have no village, and I have no partner in this with me, that you have so much influence and you have so much power when you step into it, and that really is all that they need. And if that's all you feel like you have right now, you're still good to go. Like I think we often worry that they won't have enough, that we can't give them enough, that, all of these other things will influence them. But when it comes to building attachment, which is what connection-based parenting is all about, we want that secure attachment with them. We give them or they give us their hearts. We feel that love, we feel that support, we feel that guidance, and they feel that from us. Or I should say they do feel that from us. And so then when they go out in the world, they're able to still feel supported. They're able to still feel loved.
I love that. I think it's so empowering to realize like it really only takes one. And I also, as you were saying that, I do love this idea of being able to cultivate and create your own village. We talk about this in terms of like the family dynamic. We just had a workshop with a Braveheart alumni who is talking about how can you create a family dynamic even without your ex? Like for a long time, she felt like family was her purpose in life. And she was like, I don't want to just not have a family and like give up this, desire, like very deep desire of mine. And it was like, oh, you don't have to, but it's not, your ex is not required to create that. And so she found so many different ways to cultivate and create family dynamic outside of like a normal family until she actually is able to start dating someone and having a baby and all of that. So it's like the same thing that you're saying here of even if you don't feel like you have a lot of support now, it doesn't mean that you can't create it in different ways. It might just like look different. It might not be like mother, father. It just might look different from what you're expecting. Right.
Yeah. And all the ways of parenting, like all the ways of family dynamics are fine. Right. If we like keep focusing on what the dynamic of our family should be, then we're just gonna keep struggling more.
I love it. Awesome. Yeah. So, can you also talk to me a little bit about how do we handle parenting when the ex brings in a new partner? Like I said, kind of before, this seems to be a reoccurring theme. And so I'm assuming there's the dynamic of, does this new person have parenting experience? And if they don't, what happens? If they do, what happens? How do we integrate kind of like that third party? And tell us all the things you know about that.
Yeah. And I also feel like we're worried too about like, what are their values? Like, I don't know this person and what are they teaching and how are they influencing them? So I want to go back to attachment for a minute. When we have that secure attachment with them, we are a shield for their hearts, which means that they look to us for belonging, for sameness, for advice, for love, for comfort, all of that. There was a study one time done that was like how to make your kids Republican or something like that. I can't remember the name of it, but it was basically like if you have a good, secure attachment with your kids, the chances of them living into your personal family values are so much higher. And if you don't have a great relationship with them, it's more likely than not that they'll actually choose the opposite value system than they were raised in. So going back to that attachment is that if we have that great connection with our child and that relationship with them, where they feel secure and seen and heard and validated and belonging and all of these roots of attachment, then we're that shield for their hearts. So that when they go out into the world, for instance, say they go to school and they're bullied, they'll come home and they'll know that you still love them, that they're still of worth, that they're still of value to you. So even though we don't want to be, putting our kids in situations where we know they're going to be bullied, that is going to happen. And so if you put them in a situation like that, where maybe the value system isn't the same as yours, or you even just in their parenting style isn't the same as yours, I would always tell people to focus on what I can do. Where is my influence? Where is my power? And what can I do here within this parent-child relationship? And I can be there for them, and I can love them, and I can support them. That's so much more powerful than trying to focus on how can I change my ex? How can I change my ex and his partner? How can I make sure they have less influence? They'll have less influence if you have this great, amazing relationship with your child. And as we focus on that, that is actually our space of influence, right? Because maybe they see, oh, they want to be with them more, or they feel more secure there, or they feel more safe there. They might actually start asking you questions like, wait, how is that happening? Like, what's going on? Or like, what are your thoughts about this? And your influence likely will grow from that space of like not trying to focus so much on changing others.
That makes so much sense. And like, think about how much time and energy and effort you don't have to spend on focusing on what they're doing and what's happening on their end. And how much time and energy and effort you're going to have left to like be there with your kids in the situation and setting that you do have control over. That's awesome.
Yeah. And your child is just at the forefront there, right? Like, I think when we focus so much on our relationship with our ex and we're like, oh, they do this and I don't like that they do that. It's emotionally exhausting for one, but we just don't have the emotion then left to give to our kids. But if the focus is our kid instead, like what's best for them, and let me love them and let me support and validate them, as that continues to be the focus, it's just so much better for everybody involved.
You said something that triggered another question you said, what's best for them? And I think a lot of times we get tripped up on like, well, what's best for them is to not be around someone so psycho and crazy like my ex. So what about that?
Yeah. Okay, such a good question. There is a quote that I love, and I don't remember who it's from, but it says, there's a yes in compassion and there's a no in compassion said with the same courage of heart. And I just love it, because I think that we think compassion and empathy and all of these things are like soft skills that like don't really like help that much in all these situations. But compassion is also a no. So compassion is boundaried. But it has to come from that compassionate space. So first of all, it's like, what am I thinking about this? And what is this really for my child's best interest? Is there some like dirty thinking that I'm having about myself, like as in like painful thoughts that I'm having? So what thought work can I do to kind of move through that first? And then I'm going to create that boundary. And this comes into play in parenting also, right? If you're grounding your kids or yelling at them or spanking them or giving them timeouts or whatever, because you're like, well, they need to learn. It's kind of cleaning up that thinking of like, what am I trying to teach them? What am I thinking about this situation? The same thing goes for crazy exes. So once I've cleaned up that thinking a little bit and I'm like, okay, my child's really at the forefront here. Like and for me, I always go back to physical and emotional safety. Like it's their physical and emotional safety. Then what kind of boundaries do I want to put up here? So for me, if I was in a conversation with someone and they were yelling and screaming and swearing at me, my boundary would be like, I'm not going to continue this conversation. I'm going to leave. I'm going to shut the phone off. I'm going to, whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to stop texting them, because I have compassion for them, but I also have compassion for me. That might be the best that they can do in that moment with what they're going through, but it's also not acceptable. It's also not okay. And I think that part of it, we misalign. We're like, well, when we're doing this work and we're trying to be loving and accepting and forgiving and whatever, that means like, oh, then we can still let that toxic person keep being toxic to us and keep like abusing us or whatever. Right. So when I think of it for kids, I would be looking at that too. I need to clean up my thinking 100% first. And then I can decide, okay, what does physical and emotional safety look like here? And what boundaries can I put in place for this child?
Yeah, you almost just talked about it where like, is it boundaries for you or is it boundaries for the child? Because it's like, what if they have to let their child go to this other person's home, to
Mhm.
their ex's home, even when they're like, I don't think this is what's best for my child.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah. I
mean?
think that is tough because that's just like sending them to school and knowing that they're probably going to get bullied. Right. And it's so hard. But also like it's the law that you have to send your kids to school, right? And
Yeah.
there's only so much you can do. So there's advocacy work you can do, right? In the school system, I would go and be like, okay, maybe I can change teachers, maybe we can figure out this bully situation. Like it's not that I'm just not going to do anything. And I think the same thing is true with us in our relationships. Like we can advocate for them and their needs and we can do what we can, but there is only so much capacity for that. And once we kind of hit that and we're like, we've tried all the things, and the government's like, you actually have to have your child be with your partner for this amount of time, and like that's it. Then that's when that relationship comes into play. That's like support them and I can set the best way possible. Like maybe they have a phone that they can call you on or whatever when they're struggling or when they're having a hard time. Maybe you can, send them some sort of comfort toy. Like one thing that I love is maintaining connection. So when we talk about this, it's like bridging the gap of separation. So when you're going to bed at night, you can say things like, I'll see you in my dreams, and like I'll be in your dreams, or you can leave them with a little stuffy that smells like you, or a little like I'm gone right now on holidays, on a work holiday, but my daughter is pretty young still. My oldest is 16, but my youngest is 6. And she was just like sad and like missing me and like, why do you have to go? And I want you to stay. And like, I was still going to go, right? Obviously, I'm not going to be like, okay, well, now I'm just going to stay home. So that's like a boundary there. But I also was like sitting and snuggling with her and loving her and like, I'm going to think about you. And I left her with like a bracelet of mine. I always wear like a bunch of bracelets on my wrist. So I'm like, here, why don't you keep this? And she was like, yeah, just to like remember me by. And you can do that when they go to school. You can do that when they go to daycare. You can do that when they go to their partner, your ex-partners. You can be like, okay, here, like here's something to help remind you. You can write them little notes. You can send them little text messages, like whatever you want to do that helps maintain that attachment. I think of it like an invisible string. There's actually a book, a little kid's book called Invisible String. And if this is kind of your scenario, I would get that and read it to your kid. But
Oh,
it's like
I love
that
that.
connection of like an invisible string that always connects us, like that's just there for us.
I love that. Thank you so much. That's going to be so helpful to people. Unbelievable advice. I'm so on board. I'm like sitting here thinking like I can do that with Tinkerbell right now. I could do that in my
Mhm.
relation. Like there's so many. I can even
Mhm.
do that with my mom. Like I'm just like there's so many things that you can apply that same principle to. So cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so then how do we parent when our kids are telling us things about our ex and what's happening when we aren't around? That happens.
Mhm.
So I feel like that again, like a specific example that I'm thinking of is like the kids coming home feeling really upset because they got kicked out of their own room and replaced, or talking
Mhm.
about like maybe the negative experiences that they've had while at the ex-partner's house, or even, I mean, then there's the opposite of talking about the positive experiences that they've had without the person, the actual client that I'm working with. Does that make sense?
Right.
It goes
Hmm.
both ways.
Yeah. My number one answer to most things is connection. And connection means being seen, validated, heard. It's like a witness, right? So when they come home, negative or positive, what we're wanting to do is now reconnect. So we've kind of bridged that gap, we've separated, they're back again. Connection is the most important thing. Regardless of what happened or what didn't happen, it's like, how can I connect to them in this moment? And that comes from our thoughts, right? Connection is a feeling. So it's going to be like the thoughts that go to the feelings that are going to create that connection. But as I'm sitting there with them, I can sit and listen, I can witness, I can validate, even if I can't change it. Even if my kid goes to school and they're bullied and they came home and they say, this person called me fat and they said that my teeth look weird and they said this, like, we want to just like try to solve the problem all the time. That's actually not empathy. There's like 11 different ways you can mismatch empathy, like where it's not actually an empathy, right? I do a lot of Brene Brown stuff, and I did a training through her, and one of the things we learned about was this, and one of them was fix it, and I was like, ooh, I do that a lot with my kids. I'm like, oh no, wait, you don't have to feel sad. I'm just going to fix it. Like, let me like figure this out. So empathy is actually connecting to the emotion behind the experience that they went through. And so if they come home and I'm just empathetic, I'm just sitting there and like, that must have been really hard. Or like, how did that make you feel? Like, what's going on for you? And let me just sit and listen, just like we would our friends, right? Like when they come to complain to us, they don't want us just to like fix everything. They want us to like be there for them and to listen to them. And so if we can give give space for our kids to do that, whether it was that they're coming home to tell us about some amazing Disneyland trip or that they got kicked out of their room, like in both situations, we can sit there, we can connect to that feeling like, oh, that sounds really fun, or, oh, that sounds really hard. And we can like listen and just be there and just connect with them, because that's what they need more than anything else.
I love that. That is so amazing. And I love that you just called out my number one answer to almost any question is connection. That I feel like that brings
Mm-hmm.
it home. It like makes it so
Mm-hmm.
simple of like, what do I do here in the situation with my child? I connect. So
Yeah.
nice, simple.
Yeah. I have to say one caveat, because sometimes we try to connect because we think we know what connection is. So we're like, oh, I know, I'll play Candyland with my daughter because that's connection. But in our brains, we're thinking like, I wish I didn't have to do this. I don't want to be here. This is so boring. I don't like this at all. That's actually not connection. P.S. It would be better to spend those 10 minutes doing some thought work around connection and the thoughts that are creating disconnect and the thoughts that are creating connection, and work on that, because connection for me, especially with my teen, he just turned 16, looks really different. And if I'm feeling connected, I might like send him a text message. I might like smile. I might like drive him somewhere and just chat. Like it will come so much more naturally if we're not focusing on like the prescriptive, like this is how I connect, and more focusing on our thoughts and feelings.
That makes so much sense. I'm so glad you said that. We talk about connection a lot inside of Get Over Your Ex, but it's typically about like the lack of connection that we have with future partners because we think we connected so
Mm.
deeply with our ex. Well, I say think, but we did. However, we don't realize that we were the ones that created that connection in the first place, right?
Mhm.
So good. I'm glad that you brought that up. Is there anything else? I had one last question, but I feel like we covered it where we're talking about, what do you do when a child feels hurt because their ex isn't as involved or tries to like pay them off?
Mhm.
Is there anything else that you want to add to that? Or is there anything else that we haven't spoken about that you feel might be helpful in this situation?
Yeah, I think in general, it's the switching the focus to us and our kids and off of what it is that our ex is doing. Because I mean, sure, you talk about this all the time, but like we can't control them. Like it doesn't matter what we do, but we can't control them. And so I think a lot of it is just us focusing on us and what we have control over. So I have control over my thoughts and feelings, and I can decide how I'm going to show up in this relationship with my child. And if I'm thinking all of these other things about this other person, it's going to like be blocking that connection. But the one thing I think I want to touch on is like a lot of times people are like, well, what is inner healing? Or like, what do I do? Like, how do I heal from these wounds? Like people will talk about inner child healing and stuff like that. What that means is we all have wounds throughout our lives, but we usually have a lot from childhood. And this is from either how our parents responded to us, how kids in the school responded to us, how our teachers did, how culture, media, news, all of that. And we had a lot of toxic beliefs passed down to us, like children should be seen and not heard, like children should always listen to authority, like they shouldn't question it, or they should respect their elders, like all these things that sounded nice at the time that really turned us into like people-pleasing perfectionists. So when I mean healing, that is what I mean, is like kids are just the best teachers, but really what's teaching us is our triggers. Triggers are our teachers. And so when we're like, okay, what is triggering me about this? And then like just asking ourselves, like, what is happening here? So it's like lovely to like, okay, let's drop the X stuff and figure out me. But likely if you're listening to this and you have kids, or even if you just interact with any other human beings in the world, you're feeling triggered by some things. And I think the work for us to do in wound healing, in breaking generational patterns of parenting and of being, even if you are not a parent, is uncovering, why is this triggering me? What's behind this? And how can I move forward from this? Because even if we consciously don't realize it's there, there's a lot of stuff that comes up for us. So that's what I would encourage you to do is like, even if you do not have children yet, the work for us to do, if we want to show up in a different way than what has been passed down to us. And don't get me wrong, I think that for sure they were doing their best. Like I flipped through books in the 80s and 90s that were parenting books. Like it was not good advice. It was like how to be more authoritarian. So like nowadays we have more, we've evolved to a different space. And I think it's our responsibility to do at least some of our healing. And that doesn't mean we have to like heal everything that we've ever had forever, but we can just do like one little thing at a time, one little trigger of like, okay, when I mean trigger, I mean like an emotional charge. So when I'm feeling that strong emotional charge about something that somebody said or did, what's happening here for me? Like, what about this is bothering me? And digging into that and doing that work, loving myself, having compassion for myself and accepting and understanding and all of that.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Honestly, Bravehearts, Crystal is such a powerful coach. I'm so excited that she was able to come speak to you guys on the podcast. She's going to be hanging out with us inside of Get Over Your Ex to do a workshop all about this. Super excited to have you inside of there. But how can they find you? Do you have a podcast? Can they work with you? How do they find you if they're like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I need?
Yeah. So I'm super excited to be doing our workshop. And I think we're going to be focusing a lot on these kind of trigger things. So even if you're not a parent, come to it so that you can listen to like, how do I uncover what those triggers are? And we'll actually do some of that healing. We'll do that together as a group. So it'll be awesome. So I have a podcast called the Parenting Coach Podcast with Crystal. And then I also have a program called Parent School, and it's launching again in January. I open it up in January and August. And this is the work that we do. It's to become more conscious, connection-based parents through doing our own healing so that we can parent in that way more simply and more effectively. And then occasionally I run some cool in-person retreats that are for all women, and it's self-mothering retreats. I call it a self-mothering soulcation for women. And we do it in the middle of the mountains in fairy tale playhouse cabins. So it is a lovely time. So connect with me. Oh, I should say I'm on Instagram too, the.parenting.coach. So find me all those places.
Yes. And for everyone, I will go ahead and put all those links in the, what is it called? Not the bio, but like show notes in the show notes. So they'll be there tagged. So you can just simply go and click. But thank you so much. I just truly appreciate you. I know this is going to be an epic episode, so much information and so many great tangible tools. I'm a tangible how-tos kind of person. So thank you so much for giving us that. So important to me. So thank you.
You are so welcome. Thank you.
Yes. If you're loving the How to Get Over Your Ex podcast and you want to learn how to get over your ex in 3 months or less to build a life better than the one you thought you had with your ex, I would like to personally invite you to my next group course where we take everything you've learned here on the podcast and apply it to your life. Come check it out at www.lifecoachdorothy.com.